Oracle Export Import Utility. As the utility name goes, it simply indicates export and import of data. In a real-time working environment, testing team might want to test something on production data. We directly cannot allow anyone to test on production servers. In such cases, there must be a way to export data from production database and import it into a test database. Once import is done, testing team can continue to perform their testing. In this lesson, we will look at Oracle Export Import Utility. First, we have Export Utility. It's a simple utility to export data from a database. Once export is done, you can actually use Import Utility to transfer data. The Export Import Utilities enables you to perform different levels of data transfer between two Oracle databases. You can perform entire database level export import, like you want to make a copy of entire database. You can simply use database level export and import. You can perform schema level export import. With this, you can actually clone users along with their data into another database. Next, we have table level export import. You can clone tables from one database to another database, like how I mentioned earlier. In case testing team wants to perform some testing on one table, then we can export the single table from production database and import it into the test database. The final one is row level export import. You can even define a where clause while taking an export so that only the qualifying rows of a table are only exported. This way, you can perform row level export and import. In our lab activity, we will be looking at schema level, table level, and row level export import. The database level export import is outdated. Instead of database level cloning via export import utility, DBA uses RMAN utility because it is much faster when compared to export import utility. When you take an export, there is a file that gets created. This exported file is known as dump file. This dump file is the one which you import onto the other database. Inside database, server process will be responsible to write data to export dump file. When you're working with export utility, in case you want to speed up the export process, you can use direct equal to y parameter. The consistent equal to y parameter is used to export consistent data. To understand this point, let us look at one example. Let's take you're performing an export of 4 tables, 1, 2, 3, and 4 tables. All these 4 tables, you fired the export utility at 10 a.m. When you fire the export utility at 10 a.m., of course it will start with the first table, then it will go to second table, then third table, and likewise onto the fourth table. While it is performing the export from the first table, let us assume a user has inserted new rows into the table 3. By the time export utility comes to the third table, there will be inconsistent data because there were some records which were not there at the time we fired the export utility. Because of this issue and not to have inconsistent data in the export, we use the parameter called as consistent equal to y. With this parameter, what happens is it will export the data as it was at 10 a.m. and it will leave all the records that are inserted after the time you fired the export utility. Basically, our export command will export all the tables exactly how they were at 10 a.m. The new records which are inserted by the user, they will be ignored in the export. Probably those records will be exported in the next export. But if you specify this parameter consistent equal to y, it will actually export a consistent copy of data. And the time at which you fire the export command, like in our case it is 10 a.m., the data as it was at 10 a.m. in all the tables that you're about to export will only be exported. Even if there is a change while the export is going on, it will be completely ignored. Next, we have the import utility. Once we have the export dump file from a source database, there must be a utility to import dump file into the target database. The import utility is used to import the exported dump files from Oracle database. While importing data from the dump files, the contents of export dump file are converted to DML and DDL commands. These commands are then again executed on the target server. There is a parameter show equal to y. This parameter will help you validate corruption in the export dump file. When you use this parameter, the dump file is not imported, but rather just checked for corruption errors. Like sometimes you might to check whether the file that you are about to import, is it fine or not? Or are there any corruptions into the dump file? You can check them by using this parameter show equal to y. There is one more parameter ignore equal to y. Let's take you are importing the sales table from production to test database. But the test database already contains a table called as sales. This will be a conflict, right? In such cases, you must use ignore equal to y parameter so that import utility will ignore re-importing the already existing table. It will just insert the new records into the table. It will not delete and recreate the table again. Here we have a note. If you are importing tables with long LOB data types or partition tables, the destination database should also contain same table space name as the source database. If you rewind back, export import utility does not force you to have same table space names both at source and target database before performing export or import. But if your table contains long or LOB data type or partition tables, then you must first create same table space name on target as the source database and later perform the import. With the overview of export-import utilities, we'll be performing export and import in our upcoming lab activities. One more point to mention, you can even perform export-import on the same database as well. You can export table from one schema and import it into another schema as well. Now that we know about the export-import utility, we have the lab activity where we are going to perform the exports from Oracle database. Generally, the export and import both are performed simultaneously, but because there are a lot of options within the export and again a lot of options within the import, we are going to see exports first and then we are going to see the imports. How we are going to perform is we'll be performing an export from the production server, then we will import the data from the dump files into a test server. First of all, we have a help within the export utility. The export utility is basically invoked by typing exp. The same way import utility is invoked by typing imp. First you type exp, this will initiate the export utility. Then if you type help equal to y, this will give you all the keywords that you can use within the export utility. We are onto the production server. Just paste this one. And we can see there are so many parameters like user ID. You can even look at the description, like you need to specify the username and password, then file, direct, logs, resumable, table spaces, and many more. These are all the parameters that you can use within the export utility. Now, how do we perform the entire database level export? It's very simple. You invoke the export utility, give the file name. This is nothing but your dump file. The dump file will have an .dmp extension. You can give any location where you want to take the dump file. Then we have the log file. This will contain the details of the export log, like how we specify the log file in the SQL Loader utility. The same way every export and every import will have a log file. This log file is nothing but for your future reference. And then you use this keyword full equal to y. When you use this keyword full equal to y, your entire database level export will be taken. If you look at the database level export, definitely there has to be database level import, correct? What we can do is we can perform the export from the production server with full equal to y option and then import it into the test server. But as I said earlier, the database level export import is basically it is not used in real time. See, understand it in this way. In real time, all your databases will be of little bit big size, probably in 200 GBs, the smallest one. And then you might have databases in terabytes also. The database level export import is not efficient in such situations. That's why even in your practice, I would recommend don't waste time on database level export and import. It is not at all used in real time and nobody uses it. But interview point of view, you must know how to perform the database level export. The main keyword you need to remember is full equal to y. Even while importing, you need to use this keyword full equal to y so that your import utility knows that, okay, you are performing entire database level import. Because this option is not used in real time, you are not going to see this option. Let us move on to the schema level export. In a database, you can perform a single schema level export. For example, we have a Scott user. We can perform the export of only Scott user. All the tables, all the database objects that are owned by the Scott user, they will come along with this export. Now we invoke the export utility. We give the file name, nothing but the dump file name. Then we give the log file name and we use the owner keyword to define which owner are we performing the export for. What we will do is let us create a dummy user inside the database and we'll create a table inside the user. We'll perform the export of our new user from the production database and then try to import it into the test database. Now this is the production server. Let me connect to SQL Plus /SSDBA. Create user export test identified by exp. User is created. Now we'll grant connect comma resource to export underscore test user. Grant succeeded. Let us grant select permission on the scott.emp table to the export test. Grant select on scott.emp to export test. Now let us connect to the database as export test user /exp. We are connected. Let us try to select star from scott.emp. Okay, we are able to see the data of Scott user. Let us create a table by copying the EMP table. So create table employee test as select star from scott.emp. Table is created. This new table is owned by the export test user. Correct. Let us select from the employee test table, the newly created table. Select star from employee test. Perfect. We are able to see the data. We can set lines to 999 in order to see the data nicely. Great. The table is now copied to the export test user. Now we have a new user inside the database and the user contains a table as well. This new user is not there in our test database. Over here I have the test server. You can see the difference. The test server is in white color and the green is nothing but our production server. On the test server, we already have a database running. grep pmon. We have a clone1 database that is running. We'll check the environmental variables. It is set to clone1. Perfect. Let us connect to SQL Plus. And we will try to connect export test/test. We can see this user does not exist inside our clone database. Perfect. Now this is a correct situation where we are going to perform an export from the production server and then import the user into the test server. First of all, how do we take the schema level export? We need to use this exp utility and we will create a dump file. Before creating the dump file, we'll create a location for the dump file so that we'll keep all our export dumps into one location. It will be easy to track all the exports. We will actually create the location under u02/expimp, nothing but export import. This is the location we'll be using going forward. Now let us go ahead and perform the export of our new user from the production database. exp, this will invoke the export utility, then file equal to, just specify the export file name. Whenever you specify the export file name, make sure to be as descriptive as possible, because when somebody is browsing through the OS level files, it will make more sense to them that, okay, it's an export of a schema or an export of a table or export of the entire database, right? We can say that exp test user dot dmp. This will tell that, okay, we have performed an export of exp test user. Then give the log file equal to, try to keep the log file in the same location. Generally what people will do in real time is they will give the same name of the log file as the dump file, but the extension would be log. It makes more sense to have the same log file name as the dump file name, so you know which log belongs to which dump file. And then owner is equal to export underscore test. This is the user for which we are performing the export. Correct. Let us hit enter. Of course, we need to provide the username with which we want to perform the export. Over here, we have two options. You can perform any export and import with the sys user for any other user. We are performing an export import of another user, that is exp test, right? So you can perform export import for any user using the sys user because sys is the super user. But also the user for which you are performing export and import, you can do it with the same user as well. Like right now I can perform an export with exp test user also. It's always a good practice to go with the sys user because any which ways sys is the super user and you won't have general errors while performing the export or import. I will just go with this sys user, hit enter, and we can see it is starting to export all the objects of the schema. And we can see exporting table, employee test, 14 rows exported. Of course, it will try to export all the objects inside the schema, but eventually we created the schema just now, so there are no other type of objects rather than this one single table. Great, the export is successful. First of all, let us go to the export location, that is U02 export import. This is the location, and we will check the output files. We can see there are two files. One is export test user.dump file, another one is the log file. Let us first check the contents of the log file. If you cat the contents of the log file, these contents are nothing but same contents which you see when you run the export utility. Now you might have a doubt like why we have the same content, because in future if you want to refer to the export log, then this file will help you. Great. So we have the log file and we have the dump file. What we need to do with this dump file is we need to take this dump file to the test server and then perform the import. As I said, right now we are only looking at the export. We will perform the other types of exports, and then when we are into the import activity, then we will take the same dump files to perform our imports. This is how we take the schema level export. Now you can similarly take a table level export as well. The keyword that you need to use is tables equal to, you need to give the owner name dot table name. You might have a question like, what if I want to export multiple tables? You can just issue comma and continue with Scott dot department table, and likewise you can continue to give all the tables with comma separated values. But make sure whenever you are giving the table names, you have to prefix the table name with the owner. If you don't do that, eventually the export will fail. Let us perform the export of employee table. What we can do is, let us invoke the export utility, file equal to, we need to give the file location. This is the location where we are taking the exports. Now, because this is the table level export, as I said, you should give a descriptive name, Scott underscore EMP table dot DMP. That means it's a Scott employee table dump file. Then give the log file name. As mentioned earlier, try to give the same name as the dump file. Just change the extension to log. Next, specify the tables equal to scott.emp. Hit enter. The user with which we are going to perform the export is sysuser. We can see exporting table, employee table is exported with 14 rows. Now we are into the export import directory. Let us check the files that are generated. We can see that export test user we have, and Scott EMP table also we have. We have both the dump files and we have log files for both the exports. This is the main reason I recommend to use descriptive names for your export and import files. By looking at all these export file names, you can easily make out, okay, this export belongs to this user or a table. The same way, we can even take a row level export. Let's take you have a condition and you want to export only those records from the table. Before performing this export, let us try to check the data where we can limit output rows on the department number. I will connect to SQL Plus /SSDBA, set lines, triple line. Now select star from scott.emp. In this employee table, what we want to do is we want to export the data of only employees where the department number is 10. We can see almost there are only 3 employees whose department number is 10. Correct. Let us run the export utility. File equal to /use02 export import, and then Scott EMP department 10.dump. Then specify the log file name. Log file should be the same name, but the extension should be log. And at the end, we need to specify the tables. This is the table, scott.emp. Later, we need to specify the query. This is the syntax that you need to specify the query, and this is how you specify the where clause between these backward slash and quotation marks. Copy the query, put it over there and hit enter. We'll export using this sysuser. We can see exporting table, employee, 3 rows exported. Perfect. Let us check the output files that are generated. So we have 3 types of export. One is user level export, table level export, and row level export. This way, using the export utility, you can perform different levels of export. But in your practice, you must practice all the three levels of export and also the imports. In our next lab activity, we are going to see the different levels of import. Next, we have the import utility. The way we can see parameters for export utility, same way we can also get a help for the import utility. You invoke the import utility by just typing IMP help equal to Y. Let us run this command. I'm running this command in the production server. These are the parameters that you can use for reference in the import utility. Remember, there are some parameters which are not same for both import and export. You need to be a little bit careful while using the parameters. Next, we are not going to look at the full database import, but just for your understanding, invoke the import utility, give the location of the dump file, create a new log file because this is import utility log file. Don't copy the log file from the source server to the target server. This is the log file which will contain the details of the import. This is a completely new file. And then you specify full equal to Y because it's a full database import. As I said earlier, in real time we don't use full database export and import, so we are not going to see this import. Next, how do we import a schema? The importing of schema is very simple. You need to invoke the import utility, give the location of the dump file. Now this is the dump file which you will get from the source server. Provide a log file name. This is the import log. You need to give a new name, and then the keywords will change. You can import the user from the source server to the target server with the same name, or you can import it with a different name also. We specify the from user, nothing but the source database username. Let's take we are importing the Scott schema. We can specify the Scott, and then to user is the new username if you want to provide a new name, or you can keep the same name as the source. In our export utility, we have performed export for one test user. Let us check ls-lrt. We have this export test user, correct. Now the dump file that we have, let me copy this dump file to the test server and we'll perform the import onto the test server. But before that, as we have already checked in the test server, the user export test does not exist, which means we can easily perform the import. On the test server also, I will create the standard location. We'll check the path u02exp imp. We will create the same location so that both on the source and target we have the same location for export and import. Now from the source server, nothing but our production server, I am SCPing this dump file to oracle@192.168.0.203. That is the address of my test server into this location. Give the Oracle user password. Oh, there is some issue with the connection. Once again, we'll initiate the SCP. Give the Oracle user password. Done. The dump file is copied onto the test server. Okay, once the file is copied, let us check onto the test server u02 export import ls-lrt. We have the dump file into the test server. Now our goal is to import this dump file into the clone database that we have on the test server. What we can do is we can initiate the import utility like IMP, give the file name equal to, give the dump file location, then specify the log file, probably give the same location, but the import log file name should be a little bit different. Import IMP underscore, give the username test underscore user.log. From user, we have to give the source user exp underscore test, and we want to import it into a different user. Let's take to user. I would like to import this user to Scott. Just for your understanding that we can perform export and import to different users inside the database. Hit enter /SSDBA. We can see importing exp tests objects into the Scott user. Importing table employee test. This table has been imported into the Scott user. This way you can export a schema from production database and import it into a different user in the test server. You can even import it into the same user, but you just need to create the user before performing the import. Let us connect to SQL Plus /SSDBA. Select star from Scott dot. This is the new table name, right? Employee test. We'll check if we have some data. Yes, we can see the table has been cloned. The same way, let's take when you perform the export from the production server, if there are other objects owned by the user, like indexes, procedures, triggers, functions, cursors, everything will be cloned from production to the test server. This way we perform the import of schema. You can perform same user to same user import, or you can perform same user to different user import, as we have seen in our practicals. How do you import a single table? Let's take you want to import one table. We already have the export of table. Let us import the table to a different user. Before performing the import, what I'll do is I'll create a test user where we can import the table. So create user imp test identified by test grant connect comma resource to imp test. Perfect. Now this user, any which ways we just now created, so it won't have any objects inside this user. We will go ahead and import the exported table into this user. But before performing the import, we need to SCP the dump file from the production server to the test server. This is our production server, ls-lrt. Over here we have the scott.emp table. This is the dump file. We'll have to SCP this dump file to the same test server in the same location. Oracle 123. Perfect. The dump file has been copied to the test server. I will exit, and on the test server just check if you have the dump file. We have this dump file. So how do you import? IMP file equal to, give the location of the file. This is the location U02, and this is the name of the file. Give the import log file name imp underscore scott underscore emp underscore table dot log, and then the way we specify from user to user in the schema import, the same way in the table import, you can import the table from the same user to the same user. In the from user, you have to specify the source username, and to user, you can specify the same username or a different username. But you need to make sure the user is already created inside the database to take the table. Now that we have created a new user, we will be importing the table into the new user. Let us specify the from user Scott, because our export was taken through the Scott user. From user is Scott, to user equal to imp underscore test. This is the new user that we have just now created. Then we need to specify the tables. Now you might have a doubt, why are we specifying the tables when we have already taken the export of only employee table? In this case, we don't have to specify, but understand, let's take you take an export of 3 tables. But out of those 3 tables, you want to import only one table. At that point of time, you can specify the tables inside this clause. Any which ways, in our case, we can use this clause. By default, we had taken the employee table export, and if we don't specify also, it will perform the complete employee table import. We'll import using sysuser. If you see the output, we can see that the table import is completed. But of course, there are some errors. If you remember, when you invoke the import utility, what it does is, from the dump file, it will actually create the DML, DDL commands and try to execute on the target database. On the source database on the production, we granted some permissions to the sales clerk. Followed by we had given select permission to the EXP test user on the production server. Because the sales clerk role and EXP test user does not exist on the target server, these SQLs are failing. We can also see that there is one more foreign key constraint that failed to create because department table is not available on the target database. As a DBA, what you need to do is you need to resolve these issues one by one. Sometimes what happens in production database, you might have the sales clerk role, but on the test you don't have. You don't need to recreate those roles because see, for the testing team, they just need the table to perform their testing, right? In such cases, if the table import is successful, you can ignore all other errors. All in all, this was only a table import. Our table import is successful, but yes, there are some SQLs which have failed to grant permission to different users or roles which do not exist on the test database. We don't have to worry about it. Our next goal should be to connect to the database SQL+/assist-tpa. Now, if we scroll up, we have performed the import of EMP table into the IMP test user. So let us select star from IMP test.emp table. We can see table is imported. Yes, there were some errors in the import, but eventually those roles or those other tables, the dependent tables, do not exist on the test database. So we are not bothered about those things. Our goal was to import the single table. Single table import is done. In real time, in case if those errors are mandatory to be resolved, then what you can do is you can create the sales clerk role and directly from the output run this command. If you see the output of the import utility, we have the direct SQL commands. We can create the users or the missing roles and then run them directly inside the SQL Plus manually. With that way, you can resolve all the issues inside the database in case if required. But as I said, our goal was to import the table. Table import is successful. Next, how to import a table to another user. Of course, we have just now done the same thing. We imported a table from the Scott user to the import test user. So this is nothing but one and the same. In your practice also, when you're performing export and import, try to have two database servers. Like you can have two virtual machines. On one, you have the production database. On the another virtual machine, you can have the test database and perform an export import in real time how we have done. Take the export from the production database, try to SCP the dump file to the test server, and onto the test server, import the dump file. I would personally recommend you guys to create some test users, some test tables, and play with the export import utility so that you get familiar with how the utility works in real time.